Good evening and welcome to the December Supper Club. We are glad that you are here. We're glad to be here. We're in a new location this time. We're moving around the church now.
That's right.
Again, we're following the prophetic theme, the prophetic, and what that means for us in living boldly in uncertain times. And we're exploring a different figure throughout history that we would consider a prophet. And we're talking about the same kind of characteristics that each prophet has, or what is the characteristic of a prophet. So tonight's Supper Club video is about Sojourner Truth.
Yeah.
We thought we would jump from Martin Luther in the Reformation to the 18th century, 19th century, Sojourner Truth.
Yeah, we don't know exactly when she was born, 1797, somewhere around there. Born to two slaves in upstate New York, about 95 miles north of New York City. And she went by, her name was Isabella. Yeah, went by Belle Baumtree, Isabella Baumtree. So we'll call her Isabella here until we'll explain when she changed her name. She was just 9 years old when she was sold. I think it was for $100 for a flock of sheep.
Flock of sheep and her at 9 years old. And she was sold out of, her first slave family was Dutch speaking, and so she only spoke Dutch for most of her early years.
So she sold at least once, or she sold once and then sold again to a man who used to beat her because she couldn't speak English.
Right. She was terribly abused.
Some awful,
all of her slaves.
This has been a tough one to just even read about and what she went through. She ended up, another awful part of what happened with her was she fell in love with a slave down the road named Robert, who she had a relationship with that the other slave owner didn't want them to have, and beat him mercilessly when he found out about it, and she never saw him again. She may have had a child with him. I've seen different stories on that one, but had 5 children altogether. At least the other 4 with another slave named Thomas. She, at some point, ends up, it's getting close, the emancipation in New York, at least, is becoming a reality. And so she knows it's coming, but her slave owner won't set her free, and she eventually decides to just leave. And she walks off. She says she didn't run off because she didn't.
Well, and that was a religious experience she had, that she felt like Jesus had told her, walk away.
Yeah.
Take your infant daughter, Sophia, and walk away.
Yeah.
And they were great. We'll get to that, but there were an amazing story about her religious experience, as so many prophets had profound religious experience.
And they found, when she did eventually walk away from that home, they realized later she had to leave some of her other children there, and he sold one of her children to a slave owner in the South. And so she went to court. She was taken in by a family up the road, the Van Wagners, who eventually paid $20 to her previous slave owner to free her. And then they helped her sue to get her son back. And so she was either the first or one of the first black women to win a court battle against a white man in our country.
That's amazing.
It kind of put her on the map a little bit as the abolitionist movement was heating up. It was one of the first things that she realized that she had a voice, and maybe that prophetic voice was beginning for her.
So Isabella spoke Dutch for most of her early childhood, learned English, but was not a great orator. Well, she was a great orator, wasn't a great English speaker, wasn't literate, so didn't read or write. But she dictated her memoirs to another gentleman, a famous abolitionist, and so we have writings about her, depending on how exactly accurate they are and what they've been embellished or not, but from that time period.
In fact, there's that the famous speech that you may associate with her, "Ain't I a woman?" And there's a lot of debate about how much of what we have is actually what she said. It was given extemporaneously. No one wrote it down at the time, and in fact, even the way that's phrased, "Ain't I a woman?" The way it ended up being written down was with a Southern accent, and of course she was not from the South. So it's obviously something lost when things were written down for her. Do you want to talk about her religious, that transition to?
Yeah. Interesting that when that they don't know if her Christianity was influenced by her family, from her parents, or if it was more African religious influences. But they know that Isabella, before she was Sojourner Truth, had not a church, but she made a hut out of a temple almost in the woods, where she would go and talk to God one-on-one, would argue with God, had that Moses-like experience of talking to God face to face. And that's when God said, or she said, Jesus, that's her experience was with Jesus, told her, walk away.
Yeah.
And then she had another Pentecostal experience on the day of Pentecost, where she became within the Spirit, or with the Spirit, and that was the day that she took on the name Sojourner Truth. And I think the time where she really was set apart, maybe set herself apart, and felt called apart to be a prophet.
Probably about age 46. This was 1843. So at about that age, she really claims, feels that God is telling her to go be an itinerant preacher,
And she was a
and
powerful
to
preacher.
speak the truth. And so she took that name, Sojourner Truth, to keep her centered in that identity that she was claiming for the first time.
Right. So she spoke and preached widely on, of course, anti-slavery, ending the institution of slavery, black men being part of the army. She was part of support of that, and then women's suffrage rights. She was very involved in.
She basically did that around the country for the rest of her life.
The
north part of the country.
Yeah.
A lot of time in Michigan.
Yeah, she went from the Hudson River Valley through Ohio into Michigan, Battle Creek, Michigan. I didn't know that. Kalamazoo, Michigan. She spoke at Kalamazoo College. So it's an interesting space. I didn't see her there. Yeah.
And then one report, at least, said she was almost completely deaf and blind by the time she died at
86.
86. Okay. Yeah.
Well, what are the characteristics of a prophet that Sojourner Truth fits? Why we chose her?
Yeah. Well, we've talked a lot about prophets speaking from the margins, so speaking outside of the halls of power or the systems, and maybe more, for this one especially, she's so clearly outside of those powerful places in the sense that she's not even seen as fully human as a slave, in a way that's fundamentally different than even Martin Luther.
Oh, yeah.
Just not even comparable. So this one really feels.
This is a hard one.
Yeah,
It's painful.
And the courage it's hard for us probably to imagine. What she was really speaking into. It's easy for us. We were talking about, maybe we'll get to this in a little bit, but I hope we do, back to it, this idea of raising these folks up as heroes, instead of really thinking about what she lived through.
Right. The prophet's life is bittersweet. It's not victorious.
Yeah.
It's bittersweet and painful. And this person is really painful to read about because of the suffering.
Which I think gets to another aspect of the prophet, is that they speak out of love, and and it's just remarkable that this woman, given what's happened in her life, that she doesn't become bitter and hateful.
Yeah. It is a word of love and transformation.
Unreal.
Yeah, true. And the prophets, and from that, I think her fighting with God, her wrestling with God, that she was known to be in the match with God and take God on, and her call was profound because of that. And probably that's where so much of her pain perhaps was processed in that.
I think
their
that's,
call.
yeah, that's what, when you and I were talking about this before, that's beginning to emerge for me about prophets having almost this loneliness because they're beginning to identify themselves outside of and speaking into something.
Right.
It draws them closer to God,
Yes.
wrestling deeper
Yeah,
with
more
them,
mystical.
and a kind of a mystical relationship that even we saw with Martin Luther.
That's right. He got more and more withdrawn and isolated as he aged, but closer to God in a mystical
I think
kind of way.
It'll be interesting to see as we choose the ones going forward if that remains a kind of theme that emerges.
Yeah. So prophets are not often well received. I jumped in.
Mhm.
Lots of resistance, even among other abolitionists. Sojourner Truth was in conversations with Frederick Douglass. She was in conversations with two presidents, with Lincoln and with Grant. And so, anyways, but her own.
It's so interesting. I thought that around with Frederick Douglass, they of course shared much in common, but he was interested in suffrage for males, which was that was the conversation that was being had, and she was pushing suffrage for women, and they split. They ended up they didn't work with each other after that.
They told women,
wait
just
wait your turn,
right.
which brings up
As
lots
in
of
never.
questions about what the prophet does.
Right, right.
So.
Okay. Do we have, I think we're getting in time here. Do
All
we
right.
want some questions?
Okay. Let's kind of just move toward that. I think the one thing that we got thinking about with all of this is that it's so appalling for us to think about slavery and how normalized that was at the time, and gets us thinking about our time in history and what have we normalized that we accept, injustice that we accept as normal. And we got thinking, as an example, about all of the sexual harassment charges that are coming forward, women feeling the courage. It feels like a prophetic moment in our country right now, with different women coming forward.
Right.
So, gets you. So the first question would be for you guys to explore what do you think that we don't see or that we've normalized as being okay or acceptable? Systemically. Yeah.
It's a lot there.
Yes.
Yeah. Another question is, are we prophets? What makes us different from a person who rises up to be a singular voice, a leader, or are we each called in our own way to be prophetic? Well, we believe that, but what's the difference? When do we know, and how do we know? And
yeah, we again got into an interesting discussion about, she so embodies being a prophet with her whole life, and feeling, boy, I don't know if I can do that. So am I? But we are called. We think that all of us are called to stand for justice. So are prophets those who are uniquely called by God? Is there a certain time that you can be called, and then
for a period of time?
yeah, or even in a conversation? Can you be called in a moment or not? Brought up some interesting dialogue for us that maybe will for you as well.
And last question is, every prophet needs a community to support them, right? That follows, that becomes allies to the prophetic voice, and that's how a system changes. So it's not just one person. So have you been an ally to a prophetic voice, or a movement that you agree with, that you feel compelled to take a stand and to speak out as well? Has there been a time or a place that you've been prophetic?
Yeah.
Is that it?
I think so. I think
All
we're
right.
good.
All right.
All right.
Have a good evening.